Please be advised that opinions are going to be expressed in this video, and if you are someone who does not like hearing the opinions of others that are different from your own, this video probably isn't going to be for you. I first want to give an apology for the amount of time that it took to get this video up. The last video that I put up had some issues with the audio where it was only coming out on the left side for folks, and it was taking me a long time to try and find a solution that would work for my situation to get that fixed so that both sides of the audio were working properly. And now that that is finally done, I am now able to put up this video, which is my review of the Pokemon Sword and Shield games. Like the video previous to this one, I decided to continue experimenting with going without a script to do these videos just to speed up the process and to also see about correcting the issues that I have with not putting much emotion or inflation into my voice, which is honestly really difficult for me to do when I'm reading off of something such as a script. So let me know if this is working out better than my previous videos. I'm going to break this video up into two main parts as far as the review itself is concerned. So the first part is going to be all the positive stuff, all the things that I liked about Sword and Shield. And then part two is going to be all of the negative stuff, the things that I did not like about Sword and Shield. Spoiler alert warnings here. I am going to be talking about various aspects of the games that will be considered spoilers. Maybe sometime in the future I'll do a spoiler-free review, but I'm not sure. Maybe not, considering how long the games have been out now. But I thought I'd give a fair warning for those who haven't played yet and are still trying to avoid any kind of information. So I've seen a lot of people kind of rag on the games for their music. I feel that they've actually have done pretty good with it overall. I don't feel that the music is going to be as iconic as some of the older games, but I think that has more to do with the older games coming out in the more heyday of Pokemania and have been around for so long. So I would say that they have done pretty decently at creating music that does well to convey the culture of the UK, which Galar is based off of. I'm not a fan of bagpipe stuff, but I still think of Scotland and that whole region when I hear it. So it seems like a small detail to some folks, but I think that paying attention to the types of instruments that are used in the different regions that they base these games off of shows that they are paying attention to at least some of the key points of these cultural differences. Some iconic areas such as the Pokemon Center is still using the same basic song, they just tweaked it a little bit, and I think stuff like that I'm okay with, just because they have used the same tune for the Pokemon Center for so long that changing it now at this point actually would be more bad than good, just because of the overall customers of Pokemon are just so used to something. And then you have other areas such as the boutique. I really like the music that's in the boutique. I would say that probably one of my favorite songs out of this game is the Slumbering Weald. I really like that song, and I often listen to it as I do some work around the house or other things. A lot of people tear apart the music that you listen to when you're doing the gym leader battles, and I don't fully understand why that is. To me, the music makes me think of sporting stuff, which is actually the theme that these gyms are based off of, and the overall idea. And I think that the music that they chose for the gym battles do help to convey the idea that the whole thing is based off of sporting events. And I actually do enjoy listening to the music of that too, which is actually kind of surprising because I really don't like sports all that much. Designs of the Pokemon wise, I think just like any other generation, there's some really good ones and there's some duds. I really like Yamper, Wooloo, and Corviknight among the top area there. Sobble is adorable. And then you get Ice Cube, and you're just, I don't know. Like, I look at this poor thing, and I'm just like, what? With it having the Ice Cube head, it looks like it could kind of pass for a Pokemon, but then it loses its Ice Cube head, and it just has, like, the little bubble water head thing, and it just, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to look right. Nickit is also adorable. I really like the Galarian form of Ponyta and Rapidash. They look pretty good. Dubwool and Dreadnought also look pretty good. I also kind of like the concept of Sinistea and Poltegeist, just because they do have that attempt at trying to convey British culture. Galarian Wheezing also looks pretty cool. A shame that Coughing didn't get also a Galarian form, but it's okay. I like that for the Galarian Farfetch, they kept it mainly the same. It's just like a few tiny tweaks to it, enough to make it look different. And I think it also helps set up for the Surfetched evolution that it gets in this form. I was also happy to see that Game Freak decided to continue with the regional form variants of Pokemon. I think that was a really good idea that they created for Gen 7 and they're keeping it. And also, the best part about them continuing the variants in this generation is that it is not limited to just the Kanto Pokemon. They have a few others in there too, like the Zigzagoon line from Generation 3. And I hate to admit it because I just cannot stand centipedes in the least. But the Senti Scorch line, I do have to give props to the designs. They do look remarkably like the creature that they're supposed to be designed after. Still creepy as heck for me. But still, I give credit when credit is due, and they did a good job on the design for those guys. This game was also slated to be for players who have been with the franchise for a long time players. And to me, it seems like that there was really only one thing that they really did to show that it's for longtime players, and that was skipping the catching tutorial. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It is a welcome change, though. I am glad that we're finally are able to skip that. You know, I've been playing Pokemon since Red and Blue, and after some time, doing the catching tutorial gets pretty old. So I'm quite glad that they decided to finally make it so you could skip that tutorial. Some of these cinematic scenes that they did were, you know, pretty good for Pokemon, and there was definitely a lot of effort being put in, such as the scene where you're being introduced to the starters. The starters got to move around in the environment and, you know, like jump up in the tree or dive into the water and show off what their personalities are like, and they were expressing. This is honestly something I really wish that Pokemon would get into and go full force with, just like pretty much almost all the other 3D, you know, big time AAA games have done. But this is a step into it. I think it's even more well done than what Gen 7 has, and it just needs to happen more often and be a more regular thing, but it is a step in the right direction. There were some shakeups to the usual story formula for the games, and I think that they were pretty good ones, such as you start off with thinking that, oh, this person is going to be the professor of the game, but then actually she hands the mantle over to her assistant, and her assistant becomes the professor, And I think that was actually a pretty cool little angle that you get to see the transferring of the different generations for this job position. We haven't seen that in the Pokemon games before, and I feel like that this is an aspect that people don't give enough credit for when they review the games. I know a lot of folks aren't happy that Hop is yet another friend rival sort of thing rather than the jerk rival. But they did do something with him that I did like, and I feel is another area that a lot of people have not been given credit for, and that is the character development of Hop. It's subtle, I'm not gonna lie. It's not like some grand scheme thing like they did with Silver back in Gold, but I think it is something that they did pretty well on, and they decided to take a different angle than what they usually do with the minimal character development that they do in the stories. So Hop starts off as being this kid who wants to beat out his big brother and be the new champion. So he, really idolizes his big brother and tries to live up to being in the man's shadow. But after, some time where he just keeps losing and he loses in the tournament, he actually shows being depressed. I mean, again, like it's all subtle. It's not like, in your face hardcore or anything, but it's there. And then he decides to become his own person and take on a different path after realizing that what he's been trying to pursue just isn't working. And I think that this is actually a pretty good message that folks, especially kids, need to pick up on, is that it's great that you have this idea in your mind that you want to do something or be something, but if after some time, and I mean you got to put some time into it first because you're not going to get the first go around at it, but say like after some years of you trying to accomplish something and it just isn't working, it's okay to let it go and try something else, because you may even find something else that you're more successful at. So, like I said, it's not like all big and all that noticeable, but it's there. I picked up on it, and I thought that it was a pretty good detail for them to throw into the story. I also thought that it was pretty neat that we got to see in the game a changing of gym leaders. When we do see change of gym leaders, it's usually in between games, not within the same game. Such as Koga leaving his gym to be an Elite Four member, for example. He was the gym leader in Red and Blue and Yellow, but then in Gold and Silver, he's the Elite Four. But whereas here in Sword and Shield, Opal leaves her gym and she hands it off to Bayday to take over. And I thought that was a neat little shift and change to their usual formula. As many negatives as the wild area has, I do want to still give praise to Game Freak including this into the game. It's not the open world game that everyone was hoping that it would be or wants for Pokemon to take in and fully step into. It is it's Game Freak dipping their toe into the realm of open world, testing it out, trying it out, seeing how they can get it to work for Pokemon. And again, I understand that there are a lot of issues with it, which I will talk about later. But I do think that the wild area does not get enough credit that it should get. Sometimes when developers try these small little ideas, if either it does well or they can get enough feedback to figure out how to make it better for next time, and who knows, it could turn into something later on. Maybe the next generation will have maybe an even bigger wild area, or maybe even the whole game will be open world. Who knows? It's a stepping stone, and I think it's going in the right direction, and I am glad that Game Freak is taking the chance to try something new. Raids are something that we have seen since Pokemon Go, and there seems to be some kind of debate as to whether Game Freak got the raid idea from Niantic in Pokemon Go, or if Pokemon Go was taking the raid idea from Game Freak, or if the two just so happened to be developing the concept at the same time. Like, whatever it may be, I do find that the raids are much, much more enjoyable in Sword and Shield than they are in Pokemon Go. With Pokemon Go, they're only available during certain times of the day, and you have to do quite a lot of running around to find them. On top of that, you have to be able to gather several local members in order to be able to do a raid. Whereas in Sword and Shield, you only need to find up to 3 other people. You could do several raids by yourself with the NPCs, or you only need like maybe 1 other person generally. But there is no time limits on when you can do raids. There's always an opportunity for you to be able to do them at any time of the day, 24 hours a day. And you can do these raids with anyone around the world. Anyone can jump in if they're online and they're up for doing it. So I do find that it is just so much easier to do raids in Sword and Shield, and they're much more fun because of that. Whereas Pokemon Go, it gets kind of stressful trying to find people to help you out in doing these raids, and you have to have other people with you, especially those legendary raids, and those require a minimum of 6 people to do it. It's just much more enjoyable and much easier to do in Sword and Shield, and I actually have fun, and I enjoy doing the raids in Sword and Shield. I'm also the type of person who likes to do a lot of treasure hunting in video games, so the wild area, replenishing the items that you find each day, is kind of cool, so I can treasure hunt whenever the mood strikes me. I also like that the concept of the overworld sprites coming back into Sword and Shield is really, really good move. It helps add some life to the games. It was one of the things from the Let's Go games that I was hoping that they would bring over to the mainline, and I hope it's something that they will keep and continue to do in the future games. I also like that they still have the random encounters, because a lot of people still like those. And sure, I don't mind doing that. That's the way it's been done with Pokemon for decades. So I think it was actually really good to do a mix of the two so that both sides of the argument could be satisfied. There are a lot of people who do tear apart the game graphically, and I think that a lot of this comes from a couple different areas. One being trying to compare Pokemon to games like Red Dead Redemption 2 or Final Fantasy 15 and all that. And the thing is that Pokemon has never slated itself to try and be as realistic as possible. It's just not Pokemon's style. And I think a lot of the Pokédex controversy also has something to do with it too, because of Game Freak saying that the cuts were done to improve graphics, and whether you like it or not, the improved graphics just doesn't have enough backup to it. So I think that with those two things going on might be the underlying cause as to why people rip the games apart for their graphics. Now, don't get me wrong, I do agree with a lot of the points people make, but I don't think that the game looks as bad as what people try to make it out to be. Again, Pokemon was never a franchise that went out and tried to go the ultra hyper realistic direction that a lot of developers try to do with their IPs. Pokemon was more meant to be on the anime, cartoony, cutesy side, and their art style reflects that. And I think that the overall style of the characters in Sword and Shield does a decent job of it. I think that there are some details that they could work on, such as any of the Pokemon that are supposed to be like furry or have fur, that they could do a better job of at least doing texture work to make the Pokemon look furry instead of it just looking like skin with triangles sticking out of it. But I think that considering how Pokemon has looked and the fact that they are using the same models that were used since Gen 6, it actually doesn't look all that bad. The Pokemon themselves look good. The human characters, they look fine. I think that the game definitely deserves more props for the graphics that it's getting, especially when you look at the details of the cities. I think that in the various cities and towns that they have in these games do a pretty good job at showing you the full scale or scope of the size of these places compared to the character, whereas in the previous games, because the handheld systems were pretty limited on what they can do compared to a home console, the size and scale of the cities versus the human characters was a little funky and a little off. And I think in Sword and Shield, they do a much better job of having the different proportions done right. Hammerlock is one of my favorite city places just because of how much detail that there is to the buildings and the impressive dragon looking piece that they have for the main area of interest or focus, if you will, of the city is pretty awesome to look at. And Wedgehurst is also pretty cute too. Postwick is really small, but I feel like that it is also important to bring up because your house specifically really does well to show a traditional English home from the olden days. It's a charming home and it really makes you think of a traditional British home. And I have to, give a special shout out to that because I just really like how that house looks. A lot of folks were also kind of picking at the clothing for some of the characters for the game, particularly the male player. And I've spoken to some British folks about what their take is on how the game looks and everything. And what they said is that the clothing styles are pretty accurate to a previous generation of their country versus right now, because right now their dress style pretty much mimics what the United States has. So the clothing, even though people are saying like it's plain or bland or whatever, it actually is pretty accurate to how folks there did dress, at least at one point. I like that there were some scenes that your trainer character actually does have some facial expressions to the things that are going on. Still not nearly as much as they should, but it's there. Like they are kind of like slowly pecking away at it. And I also like how the character does respond to the weather changes when you're just standing there long enough. I think that's a nice little detail. I also like how the Pokedex does have this function to help you hunt around for Pokemon that's missing out of your Pokedex. It also shows you on the map where they can be found. That was a nice little fun thing to do. I'm a completionist, as one of the things that I do when I play Pokemon. So having that was a nice little tool, and I really enjoyed using it. I like that your friends list is based off of the friends that you have on your Switch, and that it's not like how in previous games where you had to manually add the person into the game, even if you already had them in your 3DS's game friend list. So that was good that they streamlined that and made it all one thing instead of making you like just hop, skip, and jump all over the place to try to get people added. It was the right thing to do. Just make it the one thing and run with it. I also really like that you can get experience candies through the raids. And those experience candies have made my life a whole lot easier in having all these Pokemon that I'm trying to raise and get to where I want them to be. It's a nice little change from being stuck with only rare candies, though those are in the games too. I've really liked hunting around for those experience candies, and I use them like heck. And because of my treasure hunting nature, I also was able to rack up money pretty quickly, and thus I was able to buy a whole bunch of the vitamins to boost stats too. So I found that this generation made it a lot easier to raise your Pokemon and not just be a complete time suck for it, which is great. There's also Poke Jobs that also raise various stats of your Pokemon depending on the kind of job you take. It could be that they get experience share, or they get a boost to, I don't know, say their HP, or, just various things like that. I didn't use Poke Jobs very much just because I had a pretty good system of the experience candies and the vitamins, but I can see that being an avenue that some folks would enjoy doing. So there was a couple options for being able to raise your Pokemon, and I like that there were the different options that folks could choose from. Now for the ugly side, the negative parts of Sword and Shield. And the biggest and most glaring issue is the massive Pokemon cut. Yes, I know that DLC is coming out, but the DLC only includes a portion of the cut Pokemon, and we're still unclear on the details of it. For example, we know that there's going to be the Galarian forms of the legendary birds, but we don't know if the original birds are going to be included in that release as well. And then, far as the variants go, how does that count towards their 200 Pokemon count? So does that mean that, let's say if they do have both the Kanto and the Galarian forms of the legendary birds, do they count as just 3 of that 200, or do they count as 6 of that 200? It's very unclear, and there's not all that much detail yet. It is a step in the right direction in getting the cast cut corrected, but it's kind of on the slow side. Maybe I'll do a video sometime later on talking about the DLC specifically addressing that. But I did still want to include that the cut cast is still part of the negatives in regards to these games. While they did expand what things you can customize with your character, the amount of customization seems to be less so, especially with hairstyles. They just all felt like pretty generic and close to the same. I didn't feel like that there was a whole lot of variety to choose from. I went with the single ponytail even though I prefer doing pigtails, and the pigtails that they do have in these games are pretty tiny and kind of hard to see. So I'm hoping that with the DLC that Marnie's pigtails might work out better, or maybe they even have another set of pigtails I could use. But in the meantime, the current choices of hairstyles is pretty limited. There really wasn't a whole lot of content to go with these games. It took me roughly 30 hours to do the whole game. Well, I guess about 31 and a half-ish if you include the quote-unquote deep post-game. Usually Pokemon games, going from start to finish, takes me about around the 60 to 80 hours depending on which one, and sometimes even beyond that. And that's without me stopping and trying to collect all the Pokemon and fill in the Pokedex. And later on, I'm going to eventually put up my playthrough of Sword and Shield. And you'll see just like how I was doing it, and throughout the recording you will see the time that's being logged in there. and there just really isn't much to the games. They feel pretty empty and not a whole lot going on. Um, Admittedly, I didn't spend that much time in the wild area because, again, I didn't want to put too much focus on Pokedex completion until I got to the post-game stuff, which is what I typically do in the Pokemon games. So I was trying to play Sword and Shield the way I normally play, so I can give these games the fair amount of time, or excuse me, the fair grading in how much time it took me to get through them, just like the past games. And for a game that had a 50% increase in price, seems to have like at least a 50% cut in content. And no matter how you slice it, that's not good. And the post game was only about an hour and a half. I've seen people take as long as 2 hours, but Game Freak referred to this as deep post game. I don't think that they really understand what that phrase means, because I'm sorry, but an hour and a half is not deep post game. Like it or not, that gets chalked up to a lie. As great as some of the Pokemon designs were, there were some duds, as there is in every generation. You heard me mention Ice-Q earlier, and I don't know, that Pokemon is probably one of the ones that really bothered me the most out of all of them. And there are some that were kind of funky or odd. Like, for example, Greedent. I understand that the tail is supposed to look like it's fluffy and kind of in disarray, but the way it was executed in the 3D model, it just looks really awkward. To me, Eternatus looks more like a Ultra Beast than it does a Pokemon. While I do understand that the fossil Pokemon is a relation to what paleontologists used to do in the olden days of mixing and matching various dinosaur parts and creating brand new ones, I get that. It does not need to be explained to me, but that doesn't explain why they look as awkward as they do. Even if you put the right parts together, they still don't look right. And I think it would have been better to have what the original Pokemon would have looked like and then split it, rather than seeking out to make all of the parts as awkward as possible. But that's just me. There are also a few Pokemon that were just kind of randomly awkward, if that makes any sense, such as Raboot and Impidimp. I know there's a lot of folks that like Impidimp, and I'm sure there's going to be someone who's going to rip me apart in the comments over it. But Impidimp just kind of seems like a left turn for a Pokemon design. Stonjourner also is another one that I'm just like, what's going on here? I understand what they're going for, but I can't help but think Paper Mario when I look at it. Bolthound is also shown to be the final evolution of the Emperor, but it looks like it's more of a middle stage than the final stage. It's not a bad design for a middle stage Pokemon, but it does seem like it's incomplete for a final stage evolution. I'm wondering if it's going to be something that will get another evolution, maybe in one of the DLCs or a future generation or something. It just seems like it needs something more, or it needs another stage or something. Now, as cute as I think Morpeko is, it's a Pokemon that's really confusing for me. So, looking at this little guy, everything about it says hamster. Like, such as the food storing, that it can sit up, body proportions, just everything about it says hamster to me. But when I was looking up on, more information about it, apparently its name more alludes to guinea pig. It's supposed to be a guinea pig Pokemon, from what I understand. Which is great. I love guinea pigs and would love to see a guinea pig Pokemon. But then I look back at Morpeko and it's like, there's nothing about it that says guinea pig. Like, guinea pigs don't store food in their bodies, hamsters do. Guinea pigs also do not use exercise wheels, hamsters do. Guinea pigs don't really sit upright like that. I mean, they'll do it for brief periods of time to reach something, but generally speaking, they're spending like 99% of their lives on all fours. Hamsters will flip between the two, and Morpeko is shown as being upright most of the time. And Morpeko is also shown being, moody, whereas guinea pigs tend to be more stable and are sweeter creatures than hamsters. I don't know, it was just like this weird little thing that has me scratching my head like, I thought that this thing was a hamster, but apparently it's a guinea pig? It's really confusing. I would like to see something more finalized to help explain this. And the only reason why that I'm sticking Morpeko into the negative section of this video is because of the mass confusion and the potential that it is supposed to be a guinea pig, but it has zero properties of a guinea pig, which is just weird. I am also heavily upset to find that they did not create a hedgehog for this region. Hedgehogs are a major animal in Europe, especially in the UK, being that hedgehogs are an endangered species over there. So I thought like maybe they would have another hedgehog created for this region because, it's part of their culture. But there isn't. They didn't even do like some sort of side thing involving Shaman, which is a hedgehog Pokemon we already have. Snom is not a hedgehog, it is a bug. And the Pichurin Pokemon is not a hedgehog, it is a sea urchin. So, where's the hedgehog? I'm hoping that maybe they'll have something in the DLC involving hedgehogs, just to complete, the animals that are known for the region. But I'm not going to hold my breath. Still, it's very disappointing. As much as I like the wild area, it does seem to be kind of hastily made together, if that makes sense. While there is certainly a lot of activity that you can do in there, you got your raids, you can talk to other players to get free items, you got your Roto Rally and hunting for Pokemon and all that, but the environment itself just seems like it was just, maybe it was a idea that came later on in the development, perhaps. I'm not sure. I feel like that they just could have done more to make it not so rushed. Because if you look at the rest of the game, it looks pretty decent. And then you get to the wild area and it's such a left turn in the quality of the area design. And I'm not even talking about like the tree texture that everyone hangs up about. I'm talking things like the ground, where it's supposed to have grass that you walk on, it's just painted on. There's no actual grass except for the tall grass that you're running around in for the Pokemon. It is totally possible to have actual grass on the ground and not have it get confused with the tall grass for Pokemon hunting. This is absolutely possible, and they just did not go that route. The YCOM does kind of sort of function like the PSS system in Generation 6. And trust me, this is a vast improvement from the messy system that they had in Generation 7. But there's definitely a lot of things that needs to be fixed about this thing. For example, when a friend of mine opens up a raid for us to jump into, even if I were to set the search settings to be just for what my friends post, it still takes a while for that raid invite to pop up on there. So I could be sitting there for 2 minutes waiting before it finally pops up. Meanwhile, that timer is ticking away and my poor friend is sitting there waiting for me to get in there, but I'm stuck waiting for it to decide when it's going to pop it up on the list for me to get in there. And that's been pretty frustrating quite a lot. I can understand maybe not wanting to have it live feed for, the whole general public thing. But I think that at least for just your friends, it should keep it up to date as, pretty much live update on when they have raids open and such. The GTS was also missing, and of course we found out why that was. They decided to take the GTS out of the Pokemon main games and stick it into Pokemon Home or your phone, and I don't care what your personal feelings are on this. They took a standard feature from the main games and forcing you to pay for it as a phone app. And I find this to be a scummy practice. I do not agree with it. And I feel like that the GTS should have been available on the main core series games as well. I get that GTS was preserved for home because that has access to your whole database. I get it. I really do. It does not need to be explained to me. It is still the principle of the matter that this is a standard feature that has been with the core series for several generations, and now it's not. And that is yet another feature removed, less content given on a game that had a 50% price increase. The routes that you run around in are pretty small. It feels like that there just isn't very much to them versus the previous games where you had, some exploration to do. And especially with Spikemuth, where that town is literally just a hallway. The only things that you have access to is the Pokemon Center on one end. You run down this hallway of all these fake buildings that you can't get into or do anything. And at the other end is the gym, and that's it. It is so disappointing. Team Yell has been hyped up and, pushed to be, this whole thing. But then you get to their town and it's nothing. There is nothing. And they put so much effort and work into like all these other places. It's not like they couldn't figure out something to do, but it's just this empty hallway, and it's very disappointing. That being said, though the other towns do have buildings that you could enter and, NPCs you could talk to, Pokemon is still suffering from this issue of not having a whole lot going on in their towns. And overall, basically all the game has been is go to new town, visit the Pokemon Center, do the gym, maybe check out the boutique to see if they have different clothes that might work for the style that you're trying to go for. And next. So there's not a whole lot going on or things to do. And Sword and Shield I find to be the pinnacle of not much to do. A lot of people describe these towns as being pretty empty. And I think that is a fair way to describe it. I mean, yes, there are NPCs you could talk to, and once in a while you can find one that will give you an item, but there's just not a whole lot going on. And like I said before, having my gameplay drop from 80 hours to 30, and once again a 50% price increase, there's not much content. The game also suffers from having a lot of hand-holdy moments. And by this I mean this perpetual issue that the franchise has of putting up these arbitrary roadblocks to prevent you from exploring on or going anywhere until you've completed whatever task they want you to do, such as defeating the gym leader. And for a game that is marketed as being for longtime players, this hand-holdy thing is one of the big issues that I personally point out and use as evidence to say, is this really for longtime players? Because we are getting treated like we're babies with this stuff. And it used to be in the very early games that there weren't all these arbitrary roadblocks all over the place. There was like maybe a couple, but you could still move on to the next area if you wanted to, and have a little bit of a choice of which gym leader you took on in what order. But the games recently have been on this extremely linear path where, no, you cannot go on to this gym leader until you've defeated this other gym leader first. And we're going to have Wooloo blocking the path so that you can't get through. And it's just very disappointing. And just to make sure that I clear up on where my stance is in regards to the DLC and the cut Pokemon, as it's a very big issue for me. Yes, I know that when the DLC comes out, the update for getting the Pokemon are going to be quote-unquote free updates. And I'm suspecting that Home will allow you to bring in those Pokemon from your previous game so that technically you don't have to pay for the Pokemon or trade with someone who paid in order to get those Pokemon. But it's still the principle of they're only doing about 200 Pokemon, and a whole bunch of those are new ones, not the old ones. So the question is, are they going to do more DLC in the future and just keep doing more DLC until they've gotten all the Pokemon transferred over? Or are these 2 DLC packs going to be it? It's up in the air, and the issue of the cut decks is not fixed for me until every single one of them have made it through. I'm not passing my final judgment on this generation until it is completed, because even if Game Freak does make it so that you can have all of your Pokemon transferred to Sword and Shield, it's going to take some time, just because of looking at how things are going right now. So that for me is up in the air, and because I don't know what direction it's going to go, I'm sticking that into the negatives for now. And you could also make the argument of that some of the cuts just didn't make sense. We already have a Dark-type Fox Pokemon in the Zoroark line, and they didn't bring that over, but then they created a new Dark-type Fox line with Nickit. And it's like, why? Why not just bring over Zoroark and Zoroark? Why do we have to have new? So it just kind of seems like that with some of the cuts that they just made brand new Pokemon to take the place of some of those cut Pokemon, and it just didn't sound like that there was any reason for it. For those who are connected with me on Facebook, I know you've heard me talk about this very, very problematic issue with Sword and Shield, and I have several other friends who have experienced the same issue as well, where these are the first Pokemon games, especially first core series Pokemon games, that have been crashing. In all of my years of playing the Pokemon games, not once have I had the games just simply crash and shut down on me. And between Sword and Shield, I've had 6 crashes so far since the release of these games. 5 of them being on Shield and 1 of them being on Sword. And the discrepancy in the frequency between the 2 games is not to be taken as some kind of Shield is programmed worse than Sword or anything like that. It just simply is that way because Shield is my main game of the 2, and I have many more hours logged into it than Sword. So logically, Shield would be the one that experiences more crashes. But still, it's happened way too many times, way too frequent, and it's not the kind of quality that I have come to expect from a Nintendo product. So overall, did my opinion about Sword and Shield change since I have been playing it for a few months versus what my opinion was building up to be prior to release? Overall, it's still largely the same. There's only been like a couple things about it that changed for the positive, which would be the raids. I did feel like that the raids were just going to be, this pain in the butt thing, but they actually turned out to be more interesting and more fun and enjoyable than I thought they were going to be. But overall, I would say it's still mostly the same. I was not expecting to deal with the crashes prior to the release, but since the release I've had them happen quite often, and I am not happy about that whatsoever. I'm not happy with how there's not much to do in these games, and the content is much more cut than the previous generations. I don't think that having a 50% price increase for what we're getting equates to we just are not getting enough content to go with the 50% price increase. If you're a casual player, I can definitely see these games working out just fine for you. The more hardcore players are going to find these much more disappointing and lackluster compared to previous generations. There's definitely a massive cut in content compared to the previous generations. So for us longtime players and hardcore players, we're going to be the ones that are the most disappointed in it, whereas casual players, they'll probably be just fine with it. So really, whether or not these games are good comes down to what your personal views are and what things you look for in a game and what your history with Pokemon is and all these other factors. So it's an individual thing. For me, I'm still in a wait-and-see holding pattern ever since the information about the DLC got announced and how they're expanding the Pokemon cast. So it's interesting to see how the rest of this generation is going to go and what all they plan on doing in the future. So it's probably not going to be until the announcement of Generation 9 before I can give a final say on what my views are about Sword and Shield and how things are handled by Game Freak. They haven't done anything yet to address these crashes as far as I know. I mean, I'm still dealing with them as we speak, actually. But there is still time. Maybe at some point in the future, Game Freak will get off their butts and take care of the crashes. I feel like that bugs like that should be a top priority. But again, I'm not going to hold my breath. But we'll see. There's still, quite some time yet. Things could change. We'll see. If you have played Sword and or Shield, let me know if your views have changed on anything about these games between before they release and after you've been playing them for a while. And I also wanted to let folks know that I am still working on this channel and seeing what else I can do with it. I recently got into Animal Crossing, so that's going to be something that I'm looking at adding to the channel. So keep an eye out for the New Horizons content once that game releases. I also have a general gaming Discord group if anyone is interested in joining. I'll have the invite link in the description. If by the time you come across this video that link has expired, just leave a comment on the video that you would like a new invite link and I'll get you one posted. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later.
Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos. Leave a comment if there's something you'd like to see in the future. Thanks for watching.